Hello there. Welcome to the Ebon podcast. In this episode, we continue our discussion with Huni about the Tusken Raiders and how they are portrayed in the Star Wars films, TV shows, Knights of the Old Republic, and how their depiction mirrors the real-world Indigenous experience. Check out part 1 of our conversation with Huni in episode 76.
One question before we move on to the Mandalorian and the rest. How would you kind of want to see like Tatooine handled in a Knights of the Old Republic adaptation?
Oh boy. I'd love to see it through the lens of the settler first. Your character enters the world, enters Tatooine, and within the game you're also fed a lot about the Tusken Raiders. You're fed a lot about the atrocities, about the things that they've done. I want to amp that up. Not like explicit, not like hardcore for no reason, but I want the mythos of the savage Indian that was originally portrayed by Lucas, and I feel like that was definitely a product of the media that he was influenced by, those old westerns and the John Wayne films. I want those stories. I want them front-loaded to the character, to the audience, that the Tusken Raiders are this, they're that, they're savage, they're ruthless, they're bloodthirsty. They only use their banthas to like run down, poor moisture farmers, and that they're senseless. They're just murderers. They come in the night and they do this, they do that, and there is no redeeming, thing about them. And then I want the player, our character, I want Revan to go into the wastes, and I'd love it if kind of paralleling the scene in A New Hope, because it rhymes. That's a thing that we like to do in Star Wars. I want to have like a walk scene where we see kind of paralleling R2 in the canyon there, Revan and his crew, whoever he brings or whoever they bring, walking through that canyon, and the first Tusken Raider they see, it's not a bloodthirsty savage, it's a storyteller speaking to a smaller, younger sand person, and maybe they're sharing the fruit that we see in The Mandalorian, or maybe he's telling him a story, or maybe they're doing their version of laughing, and Revan disturbs some rocks, and that storyteller turns around and sees him, and then, seeing as he is a very important figure to these people, this storyteller's not alone. And then we hear, the howl that we're so familiar with, and Revan is confronted by the Tuskens, and maybe the fight breaks out and we get that type of scene. But whenever he looks back, the storyteller's not arming himself and, ready to, I don't want to all the way say it, but he's ready to, he's the stereotypical, savage Indian ready to scalp you. He's protecting the kid. He's protecting the child. I want to see him hoist the kid up on the bantha and maybe, make sure that he gets away first and then gets on his own bantha. I want to see him protecting that child because, we talked about the number 7 already, but 7th generation moving forward within Haudenosaunee culture, that's what we think of first. We think of the 7th generation forward. We don't think about ourselves. We think about that 7th generation after us. Not my children, not their children, but all the way to the future to ensure that they have the best quality of life that they can have. And isn't that what the storyteller's whole purpose really is to ensure the future of his nation, of his people, and protects that kid, hoists him on the bantha and escapes. Maybe he arms himself after the fact, but secures his safety first. And I feel like that's the first exposure I want. I want the bloodthirsty stories, the legends, the myths, and then that's your first exposure. And then maybe whenever our Revan is meeting with the chieftain later on, because the storyteller is such a high heralded character and such a high held person, he recognizes Revan, but he's not saying anything. He knows they still have to prove themselves to the nation, to the people, to the chieftain, to the warriors that surround him with gaffy sticks, because he needs to earn that spot before he can even speak to him. But he still, recognizes him, and that's our first point of exposure. And that's something I've been stewing on for a little bit here since you asked me on the pod, and because it is so important that we change those perceptions. And the core idea is, this is your first exposure to these people, and for so long it's been a stereotype. So that's how I would like to see them introduced. And
I love how you visualized it so strongly. And I think we briefly saw child Tusken Raiders in Attack of the Clones, but I would just kind of like to see them given as much emphasis as like the children in the Rise of Skywalker on Pisana during the Festival of the Ancestors. Like, I would love to see the storyteller in KOTOR, and really, if we could see like their art, their dance, their culture emphasized, and like just kind of see a different perspective of them, And I mean, I feel like KOTOR was kind of the beginning of the shift in the story of the Sand People and the Tusken Raiders. But what I like the most about what we learn in Knights of the Old Republic is that the Sand People, what they do, they're doing it because they are protecting their land from outsiders' destruction of Tatooine. They're trying to protect the land from the mistake that they made in the past.
I think that goes into, that living history. They've learned from the past, and they're respecting it, and they're seeing a people coming in and foolishly doing what they had begun, what they had done before. And I think that's definitely very interesting. And it changes, right? It changes your perspective and your thought whenever you see them in like A New Hope, or I remember I was hyped to see them show up in Rebels whenever we got the Twin Sons episode with Obi-Wan. I was hyped whenever I saw them, and then I immediately heard them howling and shooting their guns, and then it did a cutaway to just Maul taking them out. I'm like, oh, okay, we have the Savage Indian for this episode. Okay, all right, well, we still have Maul, and then I just kind of moved past it. But it really changes your perspective whenever you think about the fact that they're defending, not only defending their past and their land, and they're trying to stop the invaders from making the same mistake. But
one of the things that I like in Knights of the Old Republic, and I would want to see in a film adaptation, is you get to spend some time at their encampment, and I think seeing them, living within their society and amongst their people, living their daily lives, I think would be really interesting. We touched a little bit on that in the Mandalorian, but seeing actually more of a kind of their society as it was set up then, I think would be wonderful to see.
Yeah, for sure. On the note of the art, I'm right with you there. I really want to see that. As I said in our last pod, I want to see the art made by the Wookiees. I want to see the art made by the Tuskens. I want to see, fan posters of Max Rebo within universe. I want to see all these things, these creations, but specifically the weavers of the Tusken Raiders, the people making their baskets, because our culture has weavers. My grandfather's a basket maker, and the amount of craftsmanship and hours and days and weeks and months that goes into making even one, it's powerful. And I'm curious if that's why whenever you try and open a basket within the Tusken Raider enclave, everyone tries to kill you. They're like, no, don't touch that. You're gonna mess it up. You're gonna pull a thread. You're gonna do this. You're gonna do that. I'm curious. I want to see these crafters, these weavers, these artists. I want to see more. I want to see so much more. And I feel like with KOTOR specifically, since it's so far removed from I feel like the Tuskens that show up in A New Hope and The Mandalorian have lost even more since the reintroduction of the invaders. In KOTOR, it's not, they're not new, but they're relatively new to the Tusken Raiders. So I'm curious if we could see more enclaves, or even in the film expand upon the enclave, and maybe the room that the storyteller's in is covered in symbols, in stories, in art that he can pull from, that he can, bring the children in and tell them a story, bring the children in and tell them a fable, bring the children in and teach them a lesson through these legends, these stories. And maybe we have a couple weavers, or maybe we have a couple mixed in, or some teenagers that have been Gawi Luxa, they've been bad, that are tasked with watching the little ones, whatever it is. I think that'd be really interesting to see. And yeah, I feel like there's a really big opportunity for a KOTOR film to expand upon that. And again, I want to be in that art department. I want to see these things. And yeah, I'm curious because I feel like the BioWare writers Lucas was influenced by the films and the times that his stories came from. The BioWare writers were probably influenced by like Dances with Wolves and, Dance Me Outside, and maybe they've seen Powwow Highway or Smoke Signals, and want to imbue the near native people with more humanity, because the narrative at that time had changed. So I'm curious how, seeing as we're kind of low-key shifting into this, how the perspective would change depicting these people, like especially with how they're depicted in The Mandalorian.
Yeah, so there was a definite shift with how the Sand People were, like, compared to like the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, like how they were shown in Knights of the Old Republic, but with the Tusken Raiders and the Mandalorian, I was like, oh, this is like kind of a breath of fresh air to see them in season 2 of the Mandalorian. I think it was like the first episode of season 2. I believe it was directed by Jon Favreau, and just kind of being able to see like they have a language they're communicating, and you get to see like the uses they have for gaffy sticks. What did you think of The Mandalorian?
I loved it. I had moved into a new apartment. I got a new TV. I had saved up, and I got it the day before. And the first thing I had watched on the new TV was Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 1. And I was floored. I really loved the episode. Whenever the Tuskens showed up, and they started speaking to the Mandalorian, to Din Djarin. Oh man, I was giddy. It's weird to say, but yeah, I was giddy because they're communicating. They're a people. They weren't a stereotype. They weren't, just a flailing howl with a gaffy stick coming down that can just be scrubbed from the land, an obstacle to be taken care of. They were, people with goals and needs, we'll say. And Din Djarin, he trades with them, and he understands them in season 1. And then in season 2, he's working with them. He's working with Cobb Vanth. And I feel like Cobb Vanth is such a tribute, such an idealized Star Wars version of that old school cowboy. But Din Djarin is the new school. He's the new Mandalorian. He's the one that's ready to change and to grow and to mold himself to the world around him. Whereas Cobb Vanth, he's not a Mandalorian, but he is definitely that old school cowboy that grew up in a frontier town where you shot first and you ask questions later, and the questions you usually asked were, how many did you kill? It wasn't, oh, this one had some kind of this one looks different, this one looks like it's from another nation. And to see him working with Cobb Vanth and working with the Tusken Raiders, it was a joy. I loved it, and in my head I immediately thought, this is going to change people's perspectives on those stories, on those perceived native characters, and they're shifting away from that savage Indian stereotype. They've become the noble, people that are willing to help. They're respectful, and they have customs. And Din Djarin understood that, and that there was a way that they could help and help each other. And I love it. I'm curious if we'll see more Tusken Raiders and maybe the Mandalorian. Maybe not the Mandalorian, but maybe the book Boba Fett moving forward, and maybe seeing more from the people, especially since I feel like Fett and Cobb are going to be going at it in that series. And I gave him a little shout out earlier, but I want to see Max Rebo.
I would love Max Rebo.
Oh man, if you got to like Boba sitting in his chair and then Max just like ripping it on his little circle piano thing, I would be giddy. I would lose my mind. But yeah, I really love the changing of that perspective, and the behind the scenes stuff that was one of the actors that they had brought on was deaf, and he had the opportunity and seized it to create a wholly new language for the Tusken Raiders with their sign language that was completely different from American Sign Language, and was that version, and that it was unique. It was really, really cool, really interesting.
Yeah, and doesn't Boba Fett, like in The Mandalorian, like wield a gaffy stick now? So...
Yeah, I'm curious if he earned that through combat or if that was part of his recovery. I'm sure we're going to get more explained in the series, but yeah, he spent, 5 years, 6 years on Tatooine and never reclaimed his armor. Was it like a situation, we're getting into speculating on future-y stuff, but I'm curious if it was a situation where he felt like he had dishonored his father's armor, dishonored that, gear, and saw that Cobb Vanth was an honorable man and was moving forward. And now with the series, I'm curious if he's going to be like, nah, gang, crime lord, going for it. And then Cobb is going to be that image that he respected before, coming in being like, hey, this isn't great. Jabba wasn't great for people around here, so what are you up to? And you're like, oh, power, this and that. I don't know. I'm curious and excited. And if the Tusken Raiders show up looking more unique than they do now, I'll, again, be ecstatic. It'll be great. And maybe that'll be a story and a point of growth for Cobb Vanth to go through, is to reconcile his past and then move forward working with the Tuskens. And now that they've got the crate pearl, they're going to be excited. They're going to be jamming. So yeah.
I mean, honestly, when I saw the first episode of season 2, I was like, Boba Fett, he knew where his armor was the whole time. If he wanted it, he would have gotten it, And I kind of just saw like Boba Fett looking at Din Djarin as he left with the armor, and I was like, oh, it's kind of like the sun is setting on Boba Fett, and Din Djarin is the new Mandalorian. It showcases that Boba Fett's moved on. He has a new life. But then, like, the rest of season 2 is like, no, he wanted his armor. He just wasn't able to get it for 5 or 6 years. And I was like, wait, what? But yeah. So it'll be interesting to see, like, the Book of Boba Fett. You hyped it up for me right there, so I'm like, oh, if Cobb Vanth is there, like, because I'm just not a Boba Fett person. Like, I don't know, I just grew up with a lot of guys that are like, Boba Fett is so cool. Like, he doesn't say anything, but like, he's just so cool. And I was like, okay, whatever.
Boba Fett's great. He meant to fall in that pit. He meant to do it. He saw this the beak, and he was like, you know what? I'm just gonna punch it right in the jaw.
Yeah, that's all part of his plan.
Yeah.
hopefully if they get into the the backstory of what he was doing in his time on Tatooine, hopefully we kind of what we saw in The Mandalorian sets it up a little bit more to spend more time with Tusken Raiders and kind of see them more in their own element, being caretakers and helping,
Yeah.
as opposed to in The Mandalorian it was kind of a mutually beneficial, but to see them showing that they're they are hospitable and they can help take care of someone else from outside of their tribe too. So
Yeah, for sure. And I'll throw a disclaimer out there. I love Boba Fett. Before people hit up our comment sections, our DMs, and that, Boba Fett is a great character, but he has you gotta recognize there's some stuff that isn't all that impressive whenever you really look at it. But anyway, yeah, it's a good time. We're all excited here.
that's right.
We're all excited. So yeah, I'm curious again, like to talk about the potential of storytelling. Maybe I can sell you even more on the Kenobi show. I'm curious if, since it's taking place between 3 and 4, if we'll see any intersection with Boba Fett or the Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi, or maybe something that's set up in the Book of Boba Fett with the Tusken Raiders and Kenobi. Maybe Kenobi at one point. I feel like in my own speculation that there will be some issues that Kenobi encounters with the Tusken Raiders and protecting, like even just Luke and the homestead there. I'm curious if he's going to approach immediately with a blade or with understanding and listening and trying to understand these people, because I don't feel like Kenobi would be the type to rush in like Anakin immediately
and kill a village.
Yeah, I feel like he would get himself captured just to see where they were coming from, just to see, not like tactically, but to see the people. Because I feel like he's confident enough and maybe depressed enough, honestly, at that time to be like, well, they're going to take me in, and maybe they, I have the low ground and they just take me out one of these days. I don't know. But I'm curious if we'll see a culture developed there. Because I know in his book, there is a female chieftain. I'm forgetting her name offhand, but they have a rivalry a bit in that book. And we get to see her perspective and her rearing and educating the warriors of her village and how she protects them and how she loses a good number of them towards the end of the book. And yeah, I'd love to see that nation, this proposed nation, show back up in the Book of Boba Fett, or they're introduced for the first time, but we don't know that they're going to be, explored even more in the Kenobi series. But yeah, there's a lot of potential in storytelling with the Tusken Raiders, and I feel like the Disney era Star Wars can definitely dive into that, especially with new approaches and new perspectives. I feel like we're on the cusp of them being fully fleshed out and understood. Or I could be wrong, and episode 1 of Kenobi is him just force throwing rocks, and Anakin made it sound so fun, but I don't know. I think we'll have to see.
Yeah, I think there would definitely have to be some world building in Kenobi with the sand people, and I don't know, like we're definitely going to see Jawas, and I think if you see Jawas, you have to see sand people, and we'll see how Tatooine is underneath the rule of the Empire, and
yeah,
it would be interesting to see. One thing I wonder, that's kind of a bit unrelated, but looking at Solo, the character of Enfys Nest, do you think that character, their costume is inspired by indigenous dress?
I'm not entirely sure, but I do really love the appearance of their armor. It kind of reminds me of Kwakio culture, which my grandmother is from. We have masks for ceremony, and they remind me of those masks, but thinking on that and my grandmother and our connection to the masks is it's a bit painful, honestly, but because they are so important to Kwakyo culture, and in a deeper way helped to protect my grandmother later in life. But yeah, I do really like the appearance of the masks within the movie. I like their look. They look really badass and bone-like. But yeah, I'm curious to see again if I could get into the into the writer's room of Solo, where the influences came from.
Yeah. I had a question from Lorg from Patreon who said, how do you think the Tusken Raiders have changed throughout the Star Wars saga?
They've been given so much more development and recognized today as like a native insert, I feel, as we've been talking about on the podcast. Yeah, I feel like they've gone from just an image and a surface villain to, you know, a full people with customs and history and a future and a past. And yeah, and it's, yeah, like we were saying, there's so much more to expand on and to explore. I'm really excited to see legend stuff brought in and then, yeah, just expanded on.
Yeah, I'm excited for future stories in Star Wars. Like, you talked about Kenobi and the Book of Boba Fett. They could definitely add some of the lore from Legends and further develop the Sand People there. And, like, honestly, just, like, different species of aliens. Like, we talked about the Wookiees in episode 59. Like, there's a lot of allegories that can be made and, like, can make sure more stories are being told, and that, like, it's not just stereotypes, but, like, they're given the respect they deserve. I guess, what stories do you feel need to be told in the future, like, in the greater culture? Do you think that would... because you mentioned, like, Dances with Wolves and, like, The Searchers, but, like, what kind of stories should be told in the future in your perspective?
I feel like the stories of oppressed peoples need to be expressed in the easiest ways through the movies, the content, and everything that we consume, because I feel like one of the best ways to affect change is to affect the stories that we tell and the content that we consume. We talk a lot about the seventh generation. We talk a lot about the influence of the kids, of what they grow up learning about, reading about, hearing about. And I feel like Indigenous stories need to be told by Indigenous people, but they also need to be accessible and understood. At least the core story, the core legend, the core teaching. So if it has to be through Tusken Raiders, I'm all for it. If it has to be through Wookiees and, you know, Big Z crushing on another Wookiee in the village and then, you know, growing to be a noble chieftain, I'm all for it. I feel like these stories need to be told, but the darker aspects of them need to be told as well. I have it in my notes. I didn't bring it up earlier, but part of KOTOR, part of the Zerka quest is collecting the Tusken Raiders' Gaffi sticks. And those are, we've learned, held in high regard to those people because there's a symbiotic connection between the Tusken Raider and his bantha. We see in The Mandalorian, the Gaffi stick isn't a weapon. It isn't just designed with all these hooks, crooks, and, you know, that rough end there, that rough acorn butt end that's like a, you know, reminiscent of a war club, of a skull breaker. It's not made for that. It was a tool made for the Tusken Raider to care for his bantha, who he cares for since he's a boy, since he's young, since they're a kid. I feel like that was such an understated but important side story to be told, that it gives so much more weight to that tool that we've only seen as a weapon, but to these people it's so important for their animals, because I'm sure, you know, a bantha can't, you know, clean its own mouth It's reliant upon the writer. So I feel like expanding the stories out like that, but also, yeah, the Zerka Corps ask you to collect these gaffy sticks. I see that and I think of collecting Gastoas from Haudenosaunee people. Or to stop dancing around the subject, collecting scalps from downed braves, from downed Indians. In my research last night, I was reminded of an image of a document that was put out during the expansion of the U.S. During frontier times that put a bounty on indigenous scalps. For a male, it was 200. For a female, it was 100, and for a child, I think it was like 50, or the equivalent of that, because at that time, that would have been a lot of money to any random farmer that was having, their land encroached on by these braves, by these people, and that would encourage, more people to go out and just do the full sale slaughter. And that's something that indigenous people have had to live with, that we were such a commodity dead. There is a saying, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. There's a lot of history to that phrase, and there's a lot of weight for us that carries. I heard it later on in Clone Wars, the only good clanker is a dead clanker. And I was like, oh, great. I'm reminded of that and that history. And I feel like that needs to be shown as well, because you can't have the growth and the good without acknowledging the rot, I feel. So I feel like, I don't know where they're going to go with Kenobi, but I feel like that could be something that they could express as well, with the Empire moving in. Maybe they exact the same approach that Zerka did, collecting gaffy sticks, because that is also a parallel to history that people seem to have forgotten, or to no fault of their own has had repressed. Because I did go through the American school system, and the amount of history that's left out to keep the blemishes off of the American flag and its formation, it's crazy. There's so much history that's ignored, repressed, or just not told. And if it can be given to the public, to the modern audience, to the modern moviegoer, to the modern kid, in a palpable and simple way, a digestible way, that they can go out and do that research on their own and figure out, oh, this is based on this, this, and this. I think that's really important, that we tell those types of stories, because there is a great importance to knowing that history and acknowledging it, and that these things have happened. Because without knowing the past, we'll repeat it, but without knowing the past, you also don't know why indigenous people today hurt so much and have overcome so many things on our own. So yeah, I feel like that's an approach that I feel like we're moving into in modern media, and I'm very excited, and that's why I got so excited whenever I saw that in The Mandalorian, because these are the first steps, right? That's the first steps of recognizing all culture is a language, and then we move on to their art and understanding and this and that. So yeah, sorry to get really heavy there, but yeah, that's what I'd like to see in the future, because science fiction is such a multifaceted medium to express these things through, and give people a wider understanding of these concepts. And again, I'm all for it. If it has to be, Boba Fett addressing the chieftain of the Tuskens within Jabba's palace while Max Rebo is ripping it on the circular, piano, I'm all for it. So long as, there's that effort. and that traction moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These stories have real world parallels. They're not coming just out of a void, and they have real world implications, and they're important to a lot of people. And I hope that we see more of these stories being told with nuance and respect. Just that the effort is made, as you said.
Yeah, just the more exposure to different ideologies, whether in the Star Wars universe or our own universe, the better.
Yeah, for sure. Because the first step to solving any problem is knowing what the problem is, and education.
Yeah. Before we closed out, did you want to bring up anything, or would that be too heavy, or
Yeah, I can speak on it. So I am an Indigenous person. I have grown with the knowledge of our attempted eradication, really, not just through Western times, frontier times, with contracts put out on this, the hair on our heads. My grandmother is a residential school survivor. Whenever I was young, she would share stories with me about what happened to her and to the family I never got to know who went to the residential schools. And if you're not aware, I'll put it into simpler terms. The Canadian government, US government, and the churches had a joint effort to exterminate Indigenous children, and whether that was done through the eradication of their language or of the knowledge of their culture or their connection to their parents, it was done. These children were brought into these schools. Their hair was taken from them. Their voice was silenced. They were given a new language, a new tongue to learn. And many of them didn't speak English, but they were forced to. And if they didn't, they were punished, whether that was through verbal abuse, physical abuse, or other abuse that I won't mention. And there was 138 schools within Canada. So on May 27th, 2021, 215 children were found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Their remains in unmarked grave, a mass unmarked grave. These were Indigenous children that I'm sure didn't see eye to eye. Maybe they didn't understand the gravity of their resistance, but they resisted, and they didn't make it out of the school. For a solid 2 weeks and up till today, Indian country has been mourning the loss of those 215 students, those children, those elders, those language holders, those speakers, those storytellers, that family that we lost. And there are 138 schools in Canada. Similar stories are are about to be uncovered from those sites, or maybe they've been repressed, and maybe those documents have been destroyed. I mentioned earlier the importance of masks and potlatch to the Kwakiutl people, to the Northwest Coast people. It's a beautiful art style. I was fortunate enough to go out to Kinkum, out to British Columbia, to visit my family out there. And as an artist, I was able to paint some of our masks, some of our our pieces there, and it was a great honor. But I did so knowing that the masks helped my grandmother and her brothers and sisters, some who I didn't ever get to meet or know, who didn't make it out, similar to these 215. My great-grandfather used his hands, his skill work, to sell these masks to museums, because at the time it was assumed that that indigenous people as a whole were going to die off, or their culture was going to be destroyed. And it was sponsored by the government, sponsored by the church. It was a way to kill the Indian, save the man. So my grandfather sold his masks to local museums after he had suffered an injury that kept him from working and providing for the family. These masks helped to keep the kids away from those schools that they had heard about. And then one day, the Indian agents that were assigned in that area approached the museums and told them they were not to sell or not to buy from this man anymore, severing that avenue of income. And they came from my grandmother. So I want to encourage everyone that is listening to this podcast. I know it's very heavy. I'm very sorry. But I encourage you to educate yourselves about what happened at the residential schools, because as we've mentioned before, the first step is education. And even just educating yourself and knowing what happened and understanding why we wear orange shirts, why we have the MMIW movement, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women movement. There are still survivors today, like my grandmother, who live with this knowledge, who have gone on to have beautiful lives. There's some that have grown with the shame of not speaking their language anymore, feeling as though they couldn't, or feeling as though it would hurt them, or that's a success for the program itself. But there are so many that never got that opportunity. And it just means so much if you would honor their memory by learning their story. Because storytelling is important. And those stories are important. And that history it needs to be acknowledged. And I know it's a nerdy podcast and we've gotten very heavy, but I do really appreciate that I've been given the opportunity to speak on this, because since I was a kid, this is stuff that I've been speaking on and trying to educate people about. And yeah, y'all for listening, and please, I encourage you. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
It's so hard, but it's true, and we don't do anyone any service by pretending it didn't happen. And those children would have grown up to become elders and to carry on language and pass on the stories. And it's wrong what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for talking about it. It's so hard, and I appreciate it so much, and you've taught me so much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak on that. And yeah, I can't thank you enough, really, for giving me the opportunity to speak on it, because yeah, it is such a repressed part of history, and these are the steps forward we need to be taking.
Yeah. Well, that's the first time I think I've ever cried on this podcast. So hopefully it didn't get too heavy for some people, but you know what? Like maybe they just need to deal with that. So, so yeah, I guess, and yeah, I guess, is there anything else we should say? Or do we kind of just end there? I don't know.
I make the Max Rebo appearance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do really appreciate being allowed to share and speak on it. But yeah, another thing that we've grown to develop within Indigenous culture is a sense of humor, because if you ain't laughing, you're crying, as they say. So I would encourage people to check out movies like Smoke Signals for like a lighter tone. If you're going to go into any type of education for yourself, there's a lot of good jokes in Smoke Signals. Indian Horse is a good story for residential school survivor. I encourage you guys to check out Real Engine, REELL or REELL. What am I saying? Real like film. My brain is in places. So yeah, I encourage people to educate themselves about that, but I also encourage them to laugh as they're educating themselves as well. So Smoke Signals, I feel like, is a very good time.
Hey, Victor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Thomas builds the fire. Yeah. Me and my girlfriend were watching a clip of that earlier, and as they're leaving the res, it's the funniest thing and the most topical thing. One of their friends in their car that can only drive backwards, she encourages them to get vaccinated before they leave the res and go into the US. And yeah, that really made us laugh. We had a good chuckle at that.
Yeah. So there are some good films to listen to, or films to watch, I guess. And at the end of the day, we always have Max Rebo.
Yeah,
So,
very true.
Yep.
I also encourage people to check out a movie called Beans that should be coming out soon. I don't have it in front of me, but it is starring an Lono that lives all the way down the road from me on the same little island of Cornwall in Indian Reservation number 59. Yeah, it is Gyoandio. I'm forgetting her last name. Gyoandio. She is the main actress of the film called Beans, and it is about the Oka crisis. And yeah, I definitely encourage people to check that out whenever it comes out. I think it won a couple nominations at TIFF. So yeah, that should be a good time whenever it finally comes out. But it is also a heavier topic as well, so I give that warning before people check it out. But yeah, that's a local, Lono.
oh, awesome. I guess, how do you say "May the Force be with you" in your language? Like, do you guys like have the translation, or?
No, but that's definitely a project for me to do. My girlfriend's a stronger speaker than I am. And yeah, as mentioned, going to that American school later in life, I didn't have the language in the curriculum. But she went to the Freedom School, which is completely run by Indigenous people. So maybe that's a question I'll have to ask her later. But yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I definitely need to start throwing that around. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you very much for coming on and sharing with everyone.
Yeah. Thank you guys. And any step forward is a step forward, even if it's a baby step. But this is a monumental step forward, I feel. And hopefully next time I'm on the pod, I can keep everything light. But I'm very, very appreciative that I was able to speak on that, because it was such a huge issue and such a huge thing that happened. And you know, I hope people educate themselves on it. And yeah, and yeah, I hope that our storytelling and our things change moving forward to be more inclusive and to acknowledge the parallels that these stories can hold and the power they can hold by, drawing on those parallels.
We'd like to give an extra special thanks to Huni for joining us and sharing with everyone. These are important topics that deserve more attention. We encourage everyone to take a look at the website for the Indian Residential School Survivors Society at www.irsss.ca. Thank you for joining us. May the Force be with you.